Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about the new Superman movie. And if you're listening to this in the future, it has not come out yet. It is the 28th of June, 2025. We have seen all of the trailers so far, and it is about to come out, but it has not come out as of yet. Now, why am I talking about this before it's come out? Because I think this is one more salvo in your quote-unquote progressive defense against the movement that counters your quote-unquote progressive woke ideology within our society. Why and how? Well, I think, first of all, that if you look at the trailers, you're looking at the essence of the movie itself. I don't want to complicate the entire thing by seeing the movie first. We're just going to work on the trailers. This is the message that they want to send people to draw them into watching this movie. I might do another review of it after it comes out. But secondly, why is this one of the quote-unquote progressive salvos? It doesn't seem like it. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the fact that, as I have mentioned many times in the past, and predicted years ago, when progressivism gets on the back foot, it is going to move backwards, mostly into nostalgia, but it's going to go back to the way things used to be, let's say in the 90s, and say, oh, let's just go back to that. Everybody wants to go back to that, right? And as I always say, no, we don't want to go back to that. Why? Because the 90s, well, actually, the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and 2000s led us to where we are right now. Not by accident, by specific design, and there is no other destination. So if we rewind to the 90s, it's just going to end us back up here 10 to 20 years from now. And of course, they'll have more information of how to win again next time because they'll look back and actually use history for once, saying, well, it didn't work so good this way last time. Let's do it that way. But again, my point, why is this Superman movie one of the elements of this entire thing? It's because what the essential message I see from these trailers as what it is selling to the audience underneath the story is the relativistic idea of situational ethics, which is one of the bedrocks of your quote-unquote progressive woke culture. The idea that there is no truth, there is only my truth and your truth. And I want to cover this according to the Superman movie, because why? Because I cover heroes as paragons of virtue, and Superman is one of those paragons of virtue. And his tagline, which, yes, I understand, was added later on than when he was created, is to fight for truth, justice, and the American way. And quite literally, I have covered in multiple videos the attempt of the comic books to get rid of that tagline, to change it into a more quote-unquote progressive way of thinking. See my video on Gene Yang and his attempt to do so, and his defense of his attempt to do so, etc., etc. But this is the exact point. Superman is about truth, justice, and the American way in a very specific kind of way. And this kind of movie, although it is extremely subtle, going back to the subtle takes of the 1990s, the underhanded, palatable, if you might call it that, selling of the idea underneath the story is the destruction of Superman as that paragon of truth, justice, and the American way. Now, I'm going to go deep into this, but let's start with the movie itself or the movie trailers as we have seen them. Why am I saying this? Well, first of all, let's take a look at the fact that Superman in this new film exists in a world where super beings have existed for a long time. I think they say about 300 years. And we're jumping right into the middle of it. There are superheroes all over the place. He is just one superhero among a multitude of superheroes. He might be the strongest, but he's just one among many. Now, this is contrasted with the traditional, now I'm not saying the main, because if I say main, people in the comments will say, well, it's not the main here or here or here at this point in time. Well, whoop-de-doo. I'm saying the traditional. The traditional view of Superman within the comics is that he is the source, the inspiration of the golden age of superheroes. One way or another, because there have been multiple takes on this, sure, is that because Superman was sent to Earth and became Superman, it inspired these other superheroes and thus was born the golden age of the superhero. Now, I'll set that aside, except to say that they are doing the exact same thing within DC Comics right now. Shout out to Wes over Thinking Critical for covering this in an entire video, but they are doing a history of DC and the DC universe, and I don't think it's any kind of coincidence. I think this is DC finally trying to get their ducks in a row, matching up comic stories with the movie stories to try to become the new MCU, because the MCU is dying. But over at DC Comics, they are doing this exact same thing. They are retconning the traditional way of looking at Superman to make him just another footnote within the superhero saga of DC, not the inspiration for it. Now, there are many points from these trailers, but I'll try to keep them brief and focus on the main ones. The central core of the conflict, as it appears between Lex Luthor and Superman, is that Superman says, I am human. I feel pain and sadness, etc., etc. I am human. Lex Luthor, the villain, is saying, you are not a man. You are not human. This is the core message and the core conflict of this entire movie. So the question needs to be answered if it is a quote-unquote progressive movie with a progressive ideological underlying message. It needs to be answered in a way that, yes, Superman, the hero, is human, but what does human mean? That's the important part. Now let's look very briefly at a couple of supporting arguments for this main argument. One of those is the existence of Krypto, Superman's dog within the movie. How does that play into it? Well, because he has the same powers as Superman. Therefore, it is not the powers that make Superman what he is. That may not be the main reason why you might stick such a character in there, but it is certainly one of the supporting elements that exists with the existence of that character. Secondly, you have the existence of the robots within the Fortress of Solitude for Superman. And there is a scene, a joke scene, that has been released. And a lot of people, again, I'm talking about meta commentary here. Most people are going for the basest understanding of everything, not just looking at low-hanging fruit, but stuff that's dragging on the ground. But anyway, the meta commentary is you have these robots. One of them says, we're just programmed to act like we're human. We're not actually human. And then another robot in the exact next line giggles and blushes because Superman looked at her. Now again, this is meant to be a joke. Some people are saying this is ridiculous and contrary to logic, whatever. Joke, don't care. Contrary to logic, don't care. The existence of it is the meta commentary. And the meta commentary is, if these robots are programmed to act human, and they do act according to their program, what makes them any different than human? And the answer, of course, given by this movie is absolutely nothing. Why? Because there's another scene where one of the robots is, quote unquote, dying, and Superman is, it appears to be crying and cradling this robot as if it were human. Therefore, again, the underlying argument here is these are robots. They are programmed to act human. They act according to their program, and that makes them human because the main character, who is also the hero of the story, treats them at their end as if they were human. Now again, put a pin in that because it will come up later. Because the point of if it acts like it's human, it is human, means there's nothing special about being a human being. If other human beings can create a human being from scratch and from materials that aren't human, then there's absolutely nothing special about being human. Now, the most important scenes as regards this quote-unquote progressive message, this relativistic idea of situational ethics, are two in number. And they are the scene where Lois Lane is faux interviewing Superman, and the scene where Superman bursts into Lex Luthor's office and loses control of his temper because Lex has stolen his dog. If you recognize the pattern of the questions that Lois Lane is asking Superman and Superman's reaction to them, it is a statement of situational ethics. Again, the meta commentary here is Lois Lane is asking moral questions of Superman. Superman is A, getting upset, and B, then answers with a very progressive final statement of because people were going to die. Now, let's look at the first one and tie in the whole scene where he bursts into Lex's office about the dog. And I'll get more into this in the second half of this video. But the point is, with Superman losing control of his temper, if you have a person who knows very specifically the difference between right and wrong, that is to say, if you are a hero, which is a paragon of virtue, the first virtue is prudence. Prudence is training your mind, first of all, to see reality as it actually is, according to right reason, and then being able to make decisions according to that reality, which coincide with that reality and therefore will work out correctly. There is no need to get upset if you're acting according to the virtuous paradigm of the traditional hero. And when I say traditional, I'm going back most of Western civilization beginning 3,000 years ago up until about the 1960s. And when I first saw it, I thought it could be a one-off. Perhaps they didn't mean it that way. But the scene with Superman losing his temper at Lex Luthor, flipping his desk over, and basically threatening him because he took his dog, that's a man who cannot control his emotions. That's a man whose emotions are not a still pool, which he can use as a resource to drink from and gain strength. That is a man who is unsure of himself and getting into a situation where his emotions get the better of him. A person, especially a hero, a traditional hero who is supposed to be a picture of the ultimate paragon of virtue, would not get himself into such a situation. The emotions may be there, he may act in a very similar way, but the emotions will not control him. And that's the important part. But again, with those two scenes, if you go back to the interview scene, Superman losing his composure while talking to Lois Lane, who is his friend, looks like more than his friend at this point, is another indication that he is not that still pool, someone who draws upon that virtue of prudence and knows the difference between right and wrong. He is arguing, again, as we see in the very last line of that argument, not right and wrong, he's arguing situational ethics. Why? Because it's based upon people were going to get killed. People were going to get hurt. That's the ultimate argument, and that's the ultimate relativistic progressive argument. Mankind is the center of everything. Now, I'm going to go on from this point to argue that no, mankind is not the center of everything, and I'm going to do so according to a Christian ideal, because I will first argue that the inspiration and the tone for the traditional view of Superman is one of a Christian ideal, but it doesn't have to be according to this ideal. The idea that there is truth and it should outweigh anything else certainly precedes Christianity. As I always say, you can go back to Plato, 400 BC, who talks about the greatest evil. And that greatest evil is when a man puts what he is and who he is above what is true. And of course, his student Aristotle just explodes that entire subject. So the point being that the truth is the center that holds. Man is not the center that is supposed to hold everything together, which is what is argued within situational ethics, which is what is argued within that scene within the Superman movie, which is coming out, which again points directly to the fact that this movie is trying to sell a progressive ideal in a very underhanded, that is to say, 90s kind of way. Now, before going any further, what is my concept of the traditional view of what Superman is? I would take that from the person who I would consider, and I think I can make a valid argument for this as well, the most influential person to handle the character within the last 75 years. And that most influential person to handle the character is Jim Shooter. How and why? Well, for several reasons. I'll give you a couple of bullet points here. Number one, he was writing Superman at a time where he had, at the very least, access to, if he was to look for it, the creators of Superman itself. Number two, he wrote Superman as a kid as well as an adult. Because when he started writing Superman, the people at DC Comics didn't realize how young he was. He was sending in his scripts through the mail. He was a kid. I think that gives him a very unique perspective upon this character. Number three, he wrote this character for quite some time and did some of the stories which are iconic for this character. Many of the stories which are iconic for this character. Number four, he went on from DC to go to Marvel, became the editor-in-chief, and moved Marvel into a direction of what we see today. The MCU and everything we see up until the fourth stage, all of the great movies for the MCU, they all came from the stewardship of Jim Shooter in one form or another. At the very least, if Jim Shooter did not exist within the timeline of shaping Marvel into what it was, none of those great stories would exist, even if they didn't come to full existence while he was physically there. Number five, Jim Shooter is a man who not only lived, but also wrote this character in what is sometimes referred to as the end of Christendom. When was that? Well, basically the 1960s. And what does that mean? Does that mean the end of the church? The end of the Christian faith? No, it means the end of a world, especially a European-based world, and that includes North America, wherein Christendom had influence. Enough influence so that if you, let's say, went to public school, you would be surrounded by ideas that supported that faith rather than contradicted it. And by the way, Comics have always been behind the curve, probably about 20 years. Most people think they're ahead of the curve. No, they're behind the curve. They deal with traditional heroes, especially North American comic books. They have dealt with heroes from almost their inception, and those heroes have been throwbacks, and that has kept them 20 years behind the curve. So even with Jim Shooter writing in the 1960s, he will be writing according to a traditional hero ideal that was much more popular in the mainstream according to the 1940s. Now, I'll leave it there because I don't want to make this video too long, but let's go into Jim Shooter's view of Superman. And this is a view that he has expressed. It was in a Comic-Con panel that I covered, I think it was 2018. So, Jim Shooter has reflected on his life. He has been a writer and an editor, the sculptor of comics for at least a decade within his life, and all of that has gone, and he is defining at this point in 2018 what he thinks the core essence of Superman is. And there are two very notable statements that he makes. Number one, he said, Superman is Sir Galahad. And if you have a writer on your Superman comic who cannot write Superman as Sir Galahad, get yourself a new writer. He went on to express this in a different way by saying, these people who don't know how to write Superman are always looking for flaws, always looking for a way to weaken Superman, and that's how they think they can create a good story. But that's not how you write Superman. Now, combine those two statements, and what is he saying? He's saying that you don't focus on the weakness of this character. This character is a paragon of virtue, the paragon of paragons. Therefore, unlike those Marvel characters, which he had stewardship of for quite some time, unlike those characters who are struggling internally with a weakness in order to be heroic. No, Superman is not like that, either internally or externally. He doesn't need to wrestle with that weakness in order to be heroic. That's not a part of what the character essentially is. And very briefly, for those of you in the back who don't know who Sir Galahad is, Sir Galahad is one of the Knights of the Round Table. He is renowned as the most gallant, most pure, and most perfect of all knights. That's why he was the only one able to even catch a glimpse of the Holy Grail. Again, entrance into this entire story of Christianity. Now, very briefly, let's look at the difference between a traditional story that operates according to these Christian norms, let's say the story of Sir Galahad, with a progressive story today. It's the difference between a Christian ideal and a postmodern ideal. Now, in between those is the modern ideal. So let's go over those three things very briefly. And I always like to look at things visually. I'm a very visual person. So the visual expression of the Christian ideal is one single point, a fixed point, a North Star, as it were. For the Christian, it is God. It does not move. It does not change. You can act according to this North Star. You can find out what is right and wrong. You can determine what to do ethically, morally, according to this fixed point, always. Now, modernity took this fixed point and said, no, it's not actually a fixed, unmovable point. It changed it from God-centered to man-centered and said it is a point that then leads into a line in a certain direction. Hence, the beginning of progressivism. It is progressing towards something. Now, at that point, they still said progressing towards truth, towards something good, but it was a complete inversion of that point from something eternal to something temporal. And then you go from modernity to postmodernity, wherein the visual cue is you have a single point, and then a line comes off from that, and then goes in loops and scribbles all over the place, and has no clear direction at all, because there is no such thing as a clear direction, according to postmodernism. But the important part is that central dot is mankind. Now, we can take these three ideas and compare them in a very simple way. The modern and postmodern idea makes mankind the center of this point. Now, you can take stories from the old Christian way of looking at things, of that central point being God, and still look at them according to man. How and why? Because the idea of Christianity is every human being is created in the image and likeness of God. That's why, no matter what, he can be a fixed point, because he has that within his nature. And that, by the way, is what gives him the dignity of a fixed point that is unaltered by human actions and human interactions or human control. And you can figure out the situation according to right or wrong, according to that image which is imprinted upon every last human being. Which, by the way, gets us right back to Superman and the idea of truth justice, and the American way. Why? Because although America was created according to liberal principles, according to much more modern principles, one of those principles, one of the central principles, is definitely not modern, and it is the idea of unalienable rights. It is the idea that mankind, each individual human being, is a locus of intrinsic value because of that image that is stamped upon him, and that locus of intrinsic value is what actually makes it possible for each human being to have God-given rights. The idea of rights don't exist as something added by a government, which is what every other government thinks, every other country thinks. No. Because you exist and you're a human being, you have those rights. Why? Because of that image which is stamped upon you. You are a locus of intrinsic value. Nothing needs to be added to you for you to have those rights. You exist, that's enough. That, by the way, is the American way. And it is supported by the truth, which is the first part of truth, justice, and the American way. And by the way, justice comes in because it comes right after prudence. And if you're able to do things in a prudent fashion, then you're able to be just. If you're not prudent, you can't be just. Hence a very, very telling and spectacular tagline of truth, justice, and the American way. Hence Superman as being a paragon of a Christian ideal. He doesn't fight for his truth or my truth or your truth. He fights for the truth as the basis of the American way. Oh, by the way, two things I forgot to mention about the Superman movie, which also play into this. Number one, you'll note that this conflict that Superman engages in, this war, which is what Lois Lane is pressing him about, is not America. It's in the rest of the world. This is extracting Superman from being an American hero. And number two, if you look at all the other superheroes there, they're called the Justice Gang, which is supposed to lead up to them being the Justice League. But it's going to be, I can bet you dollars to donuts, simply, once again, the Justice League. It's not going to be the Justice League of America. And I'll happily eat crow if I'm wrong on this point, but I don't think you're going to find anywhere within this movie the tagline of truth, justice, and the American way. You might get the Gene Yang bastardization of it, which he cries, oh, it's historical, of truth, justice, and tolerance. Which again, see my old video about that. I give a very long description of the entire thing and why it doesn't work. So what's the point? Why am I arguing this entire thing? The point is that Superman traditionally is an image of Sir Galahad in one way or another. He is an image of a pure hero according to a Christian ideal. Yes, I understand who created the character. Doesn't change anything. Again, using the term traditional for a reason. Not original, not modern, traditional. And that Christian ideal is one of heroism based upon the traditional idea of a hero, which is a paragon of virtue. A person who is able, at the very first of the creation of those virtues, to be prudent, to understand the difference between right and wrong, and to apply it to his actions. To have the stillness of knowing he is doing what is just, what is right, and doesn't need to emotionally break down in order to justify his actions. A person who doesn't need to appeal to people who are getting hurt. Sure, that might be an important factor, but the main point of action is this was right. That gets buried in this argument between Superman and Lois Lane. It gets left behind. And again, the meta commentary on this entire thing is why? Why are they doing this? Why are they changing this character in this way? Well, I'll say right here, right now, it's no different than the Zack Snyder way of looking at it, because the Zack Snyder way was to make Superman Jesus. The Christian ideal of a hero, the Christian ideal of a Christian is not I am Jesus, it is I am a little Christ. That's what Christian actually means. I am a reflection of that perfect one. But you see, within Zack Snyder's universe, you get this Christ-like interpretation of Superman without any reference ever to Christ. And therefore, that's also your quote-unquote progressive ideology saying, you see, he wasn't unique. Let's just have a new one. We have the opposite here with this James Gunn version of Superman, but it's just the opposite progressive idea. Both of them are progressive ideas. It is, he is so human, and he is our hero, and he is progressive. He anchors himself in situational ethics, which is relativistic, which is the basis of progressivism. Therefore, your hero is progressive. Never forget that. Never forget that. Again, sold to you in a very underhanded, 90s subtle kind of way, but it's still there. And why is it still there? Well, it's still there because, yes, progressivism is a little bit on the back foot, but it's still in control. You do understand that. Please understand that. They're still in control. And they will move backwards, even though they're called progressives and think that they have to progress. No, they'll move backwards. They'll move backwards into the 90s. They'll move backwards into the 60s. They'll move backwards into old modernity if they need to in order to keep their ideal alive. But what they will never do is allow anyone to move back into the Christian ideal. And again, that Christian ideal can be expressed in different ways in other things than Christianity. Go back to Plato and his statements about the truth and Aristotle. But the point is, they will never go back to that fixed point of truth, that dividing line of there is what is true and there's just my truth and your truth. That is a line they will never cross themselves and will fight tooth and nail, causing panic and war, I'm sure, over the entire world before they will allow that kind of ideal to take root again, that there is a truth. I think a great example of this right today is the Polish declaring their country to be under the reign of Christ the King. The European Union is going to do and has done everything in its power to destroy such a mentality. Even though I know it doesn't take full root within that country, it is an ideal which they want to progress towards and still hasn't taken full root, but that's where they want to go. And the European Union is dead set against any movement in that direction at all. And that's the exact same element of conflict you see playing out within this Superman movie. It is the idea, which is why I went over the whole thing about the robots. It is the idea that as a human being, there's nothing special about you at all. You don't have that image of the stamp of the true, unmovable, infinite God on you, which gives you unalienable rights. No. We can create human life. We can create a human being. We have the definition of humanity within our hands, and therefore we can shape and mold it into whatever we say it is, because we're in power. That's the thing. You might not like Christianity. You might not like the Christian ideal, but I bet you would rather live in a world of a Christian ideal which says, no, the ultimate truth whereby everything is judged according to what is just and unjust is out of the reach of mankind. It exists and you have no sway over it. No government, no person, no philosopher, no theologian, no one has sway over it. It exists as an object and everyone must act according to it. Why? Because the alternative is it is in the hands of mankind and mankind will corrupt whatever they think the truth, which is my truth or your truth, they'll call it quote unquote truth, small t, they'll corrupt it into whatever is in their best interest. Which again, go back to Plato, says that is what is known as the greatest of evils, when a man views what is his own above what is true. And that is why the flavor of this movie is to destroy the very essence of Superman, which is a paragon of truth, justice, and the American way. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And, by the way, there is a link in the description for my new book, which is coming out, called Fade to Blue. You can go to that page. It is the sign-up page. You can watch the trailer there, and you can see some of the art. And if you wish, leave your email address so that you can be informed when the project goes live. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.